levy request from the Museum of Transport and Technology and also the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. This is two sort of items that lumped together here. That's MOTAT and ARAFA. It does seem unusual to have no one from ARAFA board here today to speak to their request for $18 million, but which is about $1 million more than last year. But we do have the MOTAT chair and chief executive lurking there somewhere. Hands up, well done. Behind that insufferably tall fellow there who's in the road. Thank you. Welcome. This is just one example of a legislation dictated to us by Wellington. If there's any media still awake there. That makes no sense and we need changed. So we'll hear the presentations and ask the questions and staff will do their best to answer. I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor who's done a lot of work on this along with her political working group and particularly in lobbying Minister Goldsmith for his for changes associated with that. So thank you for that. Righto, you guys, rattle off and then we'll get some more interesting people up the front.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, as you've set out, this item is concerning the levy requests for MOTAT and ARAFA. For MOTAT, you have a relatively simple yes-no decision on whether to approve the $19,021,000 levy. Sarah is here to answer any questions, and as you've just done, acknowledged the representatives of MOTAT in the gallery behind us. And in addition, we also have the COO, Craig Hickman-Goodall, who will soon be taking over as the director. Also, we have TAU representatives who assess the levy ask in the audience as well. As it relates to ARAFA, your decision is different. You're not making a decision on the ARAFA levy today. That decision will happen next month. These resolutions about ARAFA are about providing feedback to the funding board on two specific issues. One, a recommendation that the funding board's pay not be increased for this year. And two, there's an issue of the issue of the extra $500,000 that was proposed to be provided to the Auckland Theatre Company. Now, we are making the recommendations as it relates to the Auckland Theatre Company for two reasons. One, we don't think that including the extra $500,000 is the best way to address the funding issue at this stage. And there's also the issue of an outstanding ground lease, $4.9 million ground lease, which is yet to be resolved. So we'd like to take a bit of time to consider those issues together. So therefore, the resolutions for you today are to the funding board. Please amend the levy request to remove the board remuneration increase and the $500,000 increase for ATC to allow the council the opportunity to find a complete long-term solution for ATC. The other resolutions relate to this, and they are to make it clear that that first resolution is not making a decision or not rejecting the levy. Secondly, to ask staff to go away and bring back options to address ATC's funding issues. And also, there's a technical audit reason we need to provide an extension for the ground lease to ATC. So, just also to confirm that this approach, we've spoken to the funding board, the ARAFA funding board, we've also spoken to the Auckland Theatre Company, and we also have Auckland Theatre Company CEO, chair and staff in the gallery today as well. Their feedback is they're open to all options to solve this issue. Their main concern is finding a solution and finding it quickly. But with that said, we can take any questions.
Deputy Mayor Simpson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I've just got three quick questions, more for clarification for everyone. So on the recommendation, by the way, those are the wrong recommendations. I think the team is sorting that out. On the recommendation around the ARAFA remuneration, is this something that the board support?
Yes, so thank you, right, Deputy Mayor. The board's been contacted and they understand council's decision, which the reasons for the decision are carefully set out in the report. Just
checking that, thanks. And on the ATC, extra 500, is it true they only came to us less than a month ago? So what you're suggesting here is a bit more time to look at this. It's not a yes and it's not a no, just a little bit more time to look at their request around that because it was quite late to the party.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate way to put it.
And my last question is around the whole AREFI levy. And is it true that by law we can't approve sort of 99% of it and then come back with the other 1 or 2%, that you've actually got to do it all in one go? So what we're really saying here is, because you need a bit of time for AREFA, just park the whole thing for 1 more month and then come back with the suite of stuff because of the binary decision that the legislation provides. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Your Worship, I'd just like to say something as well after the questions too, around the Chief Executive.
I wouldn't dare stop you. Could I have Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I want to just follow through on the MOTAT issue. And I remember being in Parliament back in 2000 when Helen Clark moved the legislation to set up MOTAT. It had a paid staff of 10 and a budget of about $2 million at the time. And Section 15 of the Act requires that the Board appoint a Chief Executive who will imbue the paid and unpaid employees of the museum with a spirit of service to the community and will promote efficiency in the museum. Now, at the time, and it was made clear to the Select Committee, MOTAT was about a huge chunk of volunteers, 487 at the peak, and 10 staff. What I don't understand is how we've now got a situation where there is 110 staff, the volunteer numbers have collapsed, the funding is now 18 million per annum. It seems to me that a complete antithesis of what the legislation set up by Helen Clark as the local member and the Minister for Culture and Heritage was supposed to do. And at a time when a huge number of our population are into their 70s and so on and want to do volunteer work, I would have thought there's no better time to have had huge numbers. And so I want to know from you why the 110 staff that are costing us nearly 10, just on $10 million is where this place has gone to compared to where it was supposed to have gone to.
I might ask Helen and Michael if they'd like to.
Oh, definitely. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko mako frolia hau, ko aitea kawahatua MOTAT. And on my right is my chair, Helen. I was going to say Helen Clark, Helen Atkins, got Helen Clark on the thing. As the councillor will know, when he was sitting in Parliament, the reason that this legislation was passed was that MOTAT was in bankruptcy and it needed money. And that's one of the driving reasons behind the statute. The reason it was in difficulty was because it was a volunteer-run organisation. You are talking 24 years ago. So if you're looking at staff numbers and budget numbers, you only have to look at the council and look at how much that has grown over the same intervening 24 years.
Morris is against that. So.
The main driver of MOTAT was to professionalise it, which is something that we have done. The figures that have been quoted about the volunteer numbers are inaccurate. I don't know where you got those figures from, but they're not right. I can tell you when I took over in 2013, we had on paper 300 volunteers, but the reality was most of those were either no longer with us for various reasons or were not participating in the museum because of their age. We currently have 200 volunteers. It has been more or less around that figure since I have been running the museum, and we deliberately keep it at that level because if we tried, and what I think is behind the question is it being seriously suggested that MOTAT is run by volunteers with a budget that we're currently on by a staff of 10. It doesn't work that way. This is a 7-day, 364-day operation covering 13 acres with security, health and safety and cultural issues that need to be dealt with and have been dealt with, and we now have in Auckland a professionally run transport and technology museum that Auckland can be proud of and the nation can be proud of, to the point where we actually get our advice being sought internationally and both nationally from Te Papa all the way down.
So I don't know what is behind the question, but the other thing I should point out is that this annual plan process is set by the statute, which he would have supported when he was in Parliament. Every year we come to Council and outline our annual plan, setting out our staffing numbers and what we intend to do it and what our objectives are. And leading up to that process, we spend a considerable amount of time working with Regional Facilities Auckland and now its successor, Te Taki Auckland Unlimited, together with various other stakeholders, including the Motat Society. So I am not sure what the point of the question, whether it was a statement, an observation or a question, but it's without factual foundation, and I'm actually surprised that that's come out, actually.
All right, well, let's do it then. Were there 10 full-time staff when the Motat Act was passed in 2000?
You pardon?
Were there 10 full-time staff?
I don't know, I wasn't there.
Well, do you keep saying I don't know what I'm talking about? I'm asking you, were there 10?
I'm actually, what relevance does it have?
Oh, it's got huge relevance. If an organisation has gone from 10 to 110 staff, full-time staff over that time, I think that has massive relevance.
How?
Oh, okay, any organisation that's had a 10-fold increase in its staff is something we should be concerned about.
I'm actually, where is this going?
Right, he's a councillor.
I'm asking you the question, was it 10 and is it 110 now?
It's actually 113 currently.
Okay, is it 100?
114.
Okay. So you don't think there's something of a concern at an organisation? If I was on the board of any company and we had 10 staff running an operation and now we had 113 doing that, I'd want to know why.
Over a 24-year period?
Yes.
No, actually I don't think that's of any concern.
Staff numbers shouldn't go up by very much compared to what maybe costs might with inflation.
Well, what was the staff council?
Mr.
Yeah,
Chair,
councillor-
Mr. Chair, this is an interrogation bridging on execution. Can you please intervene? This is
hang on.
not governance.
He's got a thing about Morris. Got a thing about
This is not an interrogation. This is a question where one of the councillors who is elected, who is entitled to ask questions, and he has noted that things have grown a lot over 24 years, and he's asked for we've heard that it's professionalised. I'm not quite sure what that means. You told me that you're all professionals, and I'm not sure what the difference between that and a person who's just keen on their job is. But so I think that I'll let this run a little bit, but
All right,
I don't want it to get hostile. It's got to be done in a manner which is calm. But councillors are entitled to request information, and the gentleman here is entitled to provide answers.
So through the councillor, I was brought in on the back of a report produced by Dame Cheryl Sutherland, which painted a pretty dire picture of what Motat was being operated like with its staff and its volunteers. So I was brought in to professionalise that museum, and that's what I've done. And so, yes, we've got 114 dedicated staff that concentrate on the care of our collection, providing education services to 35,000 students per annum, who put on events like Christmas lights, and have actually brought back a professional approach to the collection care and management. So I'm flabbergasted that if there's any suggestion that you can run Motat with a staff of 10 and volunteers. We have a dedicated volunteer base, and as I said before, I don't know where the figure of 480's come from, because when I started there we had 300, but the reality is when we actually went through the figures in 2013 we had 200 volunteers, and we have still got approximately 200 volunteers who are dedicated to the care and running and operation of the collection. That's what they like doing. They do not like, we don't have volunteers that are focusing on the education program. And the other thing we've actually discovered that by running our tram operation, for example, if we rely on volunteers alone, We cannot provide a reliable service. That's no reflection on them. It's just the fact that they've got other things to do because they are of the age where they've got grandchildren and other sort of demands on their time. So what we do is we have professional tram drivers, which are included in the 114 staff there, supported by volunteers. And you can dovetail that through the whole museum. We have volunteers supporting staff. But the suggestion that we go back to the way it was when I took over, I would refute that. It was a mess. And so we have spent the last 12 years turning Motat into something that people can be proud of. You no longer see headlines of fraud, management in disarray, volunteers in uproar, and all those sort of things that, you know, you only have to do a Google search, it's all there for people to see. So we have professionalised the museum. It's a museum, as I said before, Auckland can be proud of, the country can be proud of, and I'm leaving it in a far superior state than when I took it over back in 2013. Okay. I don't know if my chair wants to say anything in relation to this.
Well, I might just add a little bit to that question, because whilst Councillor has pointed out that the costs have risen from 2 million to 18, and it's much more professional and better run than it was. What are the visitors' numbers and income changed in that period?
I can give you the last 5 years on that. So the visitors have gone from, in 2019 we had 205,000. We peaked up pre-COVID at 265, then of course they've come down during the COVID period, then hit 233 and they're now at 208,000. We're aiming to push that back up to the 240, 260 mark. One of the reasons why it's dipped is because, as outlined in our draft annual plan, we have had part of the museum closed while we re-roofed one of our major buildings and put in the SciTech Centre, which is referred to in our annual plan. And so as a visitor attraction, it's dropped down slightly, but the numbers are going back up. And admission revenue, it's 1.1 through to back in 2019, and it's currently at 1.6 million. So, yeah.
Right, Mr. Chairman.
That shows me that the cost per visitor is $86, which is pretty bloody expensive, I'd have thought. And the income per visitor is only about $8, if that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's massively subsidised. It puts public transport into shame, really. I mean, that is an item that needs to be thought through. I mean, I like the museum, I must admit, but I didn't realise it was cost $86 per visit.
But if you do
compared to $8 received, that's kind of frightening, really. What's the value there? What's the value proposition I'm missing?
So just through you, Mayor, the situation at Motat, the visitor numbers are just a part of the equation. Obviously, it runs a very extensive education program, which is run through the Ministry of Education. It does a lot of outreach activities, including both in terms of research, and also it sends out, you know, these small sort of STEM equipment out to schools that can't get to Motat. I think the visitor numbers themselves don't really paint the entire picture, but you're quite correct. There is an element of subsidisation, as there is for all of the institutes like Motat in Auckland. And as you know, and you've charged the Deputy Mayor with the responsibility of running the political working group, which we're working with a view to reporting back to you on where to for this institution and others going forward, because I think you noted at the outset some concerns you have with regard to the legislation, and to a certain extent the councillor's previous questions date back to that time when that legislation was put in place. And I can tell you that from the board's perspective, and being chair of the board, we are completely open to discussing those matters with the political working group with a view to bringing something to the council. I think it was toward the end of June.
All right, that's fair enough, but if the Ministry of Education is involved, are they contributing to the cost of the
They do.
education?
Through the chair,
So
yes.
that you've got more money coming in on top of that, but it still comes back to $86
No,
per
through
visitor.
the chair, you can apply that mathematical formula to any institution in New Zealand. Te Papa, doesn't matter, you will get a similar figure. The other thing that you've got to factor in is it's not just about the visitors, it's about the maintenance, preservation, conservation of our nation's heritage. And there is a cost associated with that. There's a storage cost associated with that. So applying a cost this divided by the number of visitors is a very blunt instrument for analysing what the makeup and value of an institution like MOTAT or an art gallery is. There are a whole pile of other things that happen behind the scenes that museums have to do. We have to preserve the history. That's in our brief, it's in our act. We maintain and look after our heritage. And there is a cost, and that's a significant cost associated with that.
There's an $18 million cost to ratepayers as well, and you've got to be able to defend that, and I have to defend that as well. And so, I mean, you shouldn't bridle at being asked
Oh, no,
to
I'm not
question
I'm not
$86 per
through the
head.
chair. No, I'm not bridling against that. That is a very
lot.
fair question.
I
What
mean, I will
bridling-
ask exactly
Yeah.
the same of the theatres that come in front of us. And we had the Q Theatre in recently, and we did that thing, and they weren't that far off breaking even. In fact, if we told you we added $10 a shot coming in, they'd break even, and I'm blowed if I know why they don't.
Yeah.
But you're going to add $80 a shot, and I don't think a lot of people would come. And then you've got to examine the other thing for your costs. I've got to be harsh about this, but not, everything's a business.
Point of order.
No, there's no point of order.
Is this a question, Mayor? Because it is an interrogation.
This is the person who I'm asking about, so don't interrupt.
I asked a point of order.
I'm just asking the person in charge of it to justify $18 million to me. And I'm going to vote on this thing shortly, probably in favour of it, but I want to, if you've got a lot of stuff that's stored that no one's looking at, sell it. That preserves it.
Okay. Yeah. Is that a question? You're suggesting that we
I'm asking
sell
is there some
New
stuff
Zealand's
that you would
heritage?
rationalise within your stuff? Because if we're storing it for no
You
one to look at
can't
it,
sell heritage. There is a whole pile of museum ethics and code around the storage and disposal of museum objects. You can't just sell them. You have to offer them up to other museums. You have to offer them back to the original donor. There is no magic panacea, let's sell the Solent flying boat that somehow produces a huge amount of money. It doesn't work like that in the museum world. What's behind your question is how important is arts, culture and heritage to Auckland? By all, if you're sitting there behind the question saying, let's get rid of all these things because they cost $80 per person, what's the city going to be like without arts, culture and heritage?
no, that's a much broader.
Well, you were on the cusp of a broader question. That's
Well,
exactly
the
what
broader
you're driving
question
at.
was that the Q Theatre is only within $10
But
of
the
breaking
Q
even, and
Theatre
you are $80
Yes, but the Q
away
Theatre
from it.
doesn't have a heritage collection that it's got to preserve.
I mean, I went to the vintage car thing just recently, and there was lots of them preserved there without a museum.
I'm not sure I understand the point of that. There's car clubs all over New Zealand where individuals with passion pay for their individual cars.
And the public see them in fairs.
We are tasked by statute to preserve Auckland and the nation's heritage.
Okay, well, I'll finish it there and ask Ken Turner to ask his.
Thank you very much. And there's no disrespect to your efforts or the work you've put into turning around financially. I have been approached by people in the trade. I'm 66 and I mix with the tradies. I have talked just recently at some length about MOTAT because I've been involved in a little thing to do with a rail licence and stuff like that, and mixed with people, present and ex-volunteers of MOTAT. There's a perception, I think I did a little bit of Googling a couple of weeks ago, not realising this meeting was coming, there's a bit of change of direction, am I correct, in MOTAT from, you know, old clunkers to more of a science future-based presentation. Is that wrong or right? Right or wrong?
No, it's partially right. So going back to what MOTAT is about transport and technology. And behind technology is science. And behind science is science, technology, engineering and maths. In order to understand the technology and the transport items, you have to have science. So we are focusing on both the transport and technology items and pulling out the science. So we're not just telling the historical stories behind the objects themselves, we're explaining how the objects work, what are the scientific principles behind it. So there's a slight shift, but I know the sort of discussion you've had is that the focus has moved away from transport and now it's getting into science, and it's not in accordance with the Act. That is wrong. And in actual fact, we are still collecting significantly more transport and technology items than we have in the past. And what we're actually also doing is collecting the latest technology and transport. So it's not just stuck in a 1970s, 80s time warp, we're bringing that technology and stuff up to date. The other thing I would point out is that the building that we're in the process of we've put the new roof on and we're putting the SciTech Centre in, that building was funded by the Ministry of Education as a science centre back in 1970. It was opened by, I think it was Prince Edward, as a science centre. It lasted 1 year before it became full of transport objects. What we're doing is taking it back to its original mana as a science centre. But inside that science centre, we are putting heritage objects so that we can go back and explain how do they work. So the two are interconnected, or the three are interconnected. Transport, technology and science are all interconnected.
Thank you very much. If I could just give the feedback, I commend the science. There's a lot of mechanics out there who don't understand that brakes actually dissipate energy. They don't actually lock something up. But my oldest son, 40, with these two boys, went to MOTAT about 6 or 7 months ago, before I even knew about this subject. He's a tradie, he works on heavy, big equipment, specialised equipment, took his two sons who are Westies on their little motorbikes at 3 and, well, now 5 and 7 at this age. And he said it wasn't what he expected and he didn't get out of it what he went there for. So I just give you that feedback. That's why I triggered into some of the comments that have been made to me. So, thank you.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do. I'm not sure what he was actually looking for.
What he was looking for was old-fashioned clunkers to show them how it used to be in the old days.
Oh. Yeah, that's interesting because we've got a whole exhibit area that deals with exactly that. Maybe you didn't find it.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Newman, please.
Thank you. It's been an interesting exchange this afternoon, and I commend you for giving your view and for receiving the questions. And this should be a place where questions are asked and answered.
Yes.
My questions go to, and I'm not on the working party, but just talking about the revenue assumptions. Going back to that, so you're looking at the levy request, and 86% of which comprises 86% of the total revenue. So that nets out at 2.66 million that comes from other sources. Can I just get clarity? What of the 2.66 million, how much of that is essentially paid for by takings at the gate, and how much of that is paid for by the Ministry of Education, and then what's left over?
Okay, so just give you sort of the emission revenue, 1.6 million. Commercial revenue is about 577, and I think the top of my head it's about 140,000 from the Ministry of Education, plus there's grants and other lottery grants and other funding sources. Plus there is a partnership with Samsung, which we're in the process of finalising, and other bits and pieces where people are supporting various aspects of the museum.
Okay, so that 140,000 from the Ministry of Education. So could I describe that as an annual gift for your contribution towards supporting STEM as an education offering within primary and intermediate schools, or?
No, it's not a gift. It's actually part of it used to be the learning outside the classroom arrangements. It's now the ECE. I can never remember what that's, something like curriculum education. It's part and parcel of providing schools with a specific program. So when schools come and visit, they go through experiences at MOTAT that are in line with the Ministry's curriculum.
What's the chance that you could, over the next 5 years, say, look at maybe a 10% increase in the amount of revenue that you take as a share via admissions, and maybe looking to try and drive up the Ministry's contribution? I don't know how that Ministry contribution works, but I'd like to. I mean, to me, I love MOTAT. I think it's great, but it's an eye-watering sum of funding as a share of your operation. I'm not trying to be disparaging, but it's a large sum, and you know, in a very cost-constrained environment. I'm just wondering, how quickly could you dial up your revenue from other sources? Because you never know how long that statutory monopoly is going to exist.
So just through you, Chair, I'll answer that question. Given that Michael, as you've heard, is leaving the museum shortly, and Craig, who's taking over from him, is sitting behind me. Look, the funding issue is absolutely top of the list in terms of the considerations of both the board and the senior management team. We are looking at all of the things you've mentioned as a way of increasing the overall situation so that we can have a meaningful conversation with council about the reliance on that number, and we're absolutely open to doing that. And just on that, and this ties in very well to the next item, I think, on the agenda, which is the resolution that you'll be asked to consider for the War Memorial Museum. Now, the recommendation in that report is to accept a 3-year funding agreement. And I can say categorically that from the board of MOTAT, if you accept that resolution from the War Memorial, we will be looking to do something similar with Auckland Council, which will do 2 things. One, it will certainly be focusing our minds in those areas that you've asked about, Councillor Newman, but also it will be assisting both us and both council in terms of the security around the numbers and the number itself looking forward. So I want to assure you that the reason we're not here talking about a 3-year funding agreement today is because, well, we were really interested to know how the War Memorial Museum goes first, to be quite frank. And if it's successful at this meeting, then we will be certainly discussing that with the political working group when we meet with them in about 2 or 3 weeks. So thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Hills, please.
I guess I was, before everything kind of went sideways, I was going to ask around, what have been the sort of increases. I mean, we go there with Theo, and the cafe and gift shop, which are revenue streams alone, would be over 10 staff. So, I mean, I'm trying to understand the changes over 20 years, if that, and I can't find any documentation of just 10 staff running the place, but my understanding of just security and people, what are the changes over a 24-year period, as I've seen. The volunteers are great, but you need to have that base of...
Yeah, so MOTAT's broken into 3 component parts. You've got the collection side, which I alluded to before, which is around the storage, maintenance, preservation, and operation of heritage collection objects, and that takes a lot of management. The security alone, we're covering 3 sites covering over 13 acres, so we have security guards, cameras, the whole works that goes with that. We have, you alluded to it, we've got staff in shops, we've got hosts keeping an eye on the exhibition floors to make sure that, and to answer any questions that visitors may have. And then we've just got a team that actually managing the volunteers side of it takes a couple of people alone. But we are talking 24 years. We are talking, the visitor numbers were a lot less back then. They've grown. And as has the complexity of operating something of that size. We've got health and safety issues. We run a train, tram system. So we are subjected to the same legislative scrutiny as Kiwi Rail with our operations. So the whole complexity of the operation over 24 years has grown significantly.
And my understanding, you know, although it was controversial, it was yourself and others who pushed to have things like paid parking and other things to help supplement.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we've got a loan currently is we developed paid car parking over at our Motions Road site. One of the reasons for that was we foresaw that the Miola Road would be closed and that parking would be removed off that roading, and it would be pushed up into the museum. And so we took the opportunity to develop a car park there that generates revenue, currently around about the $8,000 per month side of things. It's a relatively small car park, but we do that in conjunction with the Auckland Zoo. So we've got that aspect of it as well. But that required us putting in quite a complex stormwater system. The water that goes down through the stormwater system and goes into the Miola Creek is, I'm told by our engineers, good enough to drink. I wouldn't test it myself, but that's what they've told. So we spent a considerable amount of money making sure that that was the car park was done well. And we have stage 2 when we can afford to do that, or in discussions with Auckland Transport, looking at developing the rest of that in order to support the removal of the cars off Miola Road. But that's just one of the initiatives where, you know, generating income from a car park source. And
the events, like I don't remember you having so we go to the Christmas lights and all the big events now. I mean, how many staff does it take are those paid on your books, or are those contractors?
Those are paid. We have contractors put in the lights for Christmas lights, but just to put that in perspective, we had something like 53,000 people through for Christmas lights. That was a paid event. The Mayor will be pleased to know that actually we made money out of that. And that's an event where you're bringing people in to Christmas lights. It's showing Motat in literally, no pun intended, a different light. But we also have exhibition spaces open so that people can actually see the heritage and learn about the technology and the science associated with it.
And my last question, and you have fed this back to us over many years, and I know you're working with Tātaki, but haven't some of the big increases been because of the state of the buildings? Like, either we have to decide to have these big increases, or you just demolish the buildings, or so I don't know if people understand that you've got a huge number of buildings there, but they're all falling apart, but this is not operating.
Yeah, so one of the reasons for our levy request over the period since I've been at Motat is to address the capital infrastructure issues. So we have a significant number of buildings that have encapsulated asbestos in them. They are old. They were never designed to be museum buildings. They were ex-school buildings or something else from the 60s and 70s. They are starting to deteriorate, so we are either replacing them or removing them as and where we can. Take, for example, the building that I referred to, the SciTech Centre. That roof was leaking and was about to collapse, so we've just spent quite a lot of money on that building. And in the draft annual plan that's before the councillors, there's reference to the pump house roof. That needs to be replaced, and the irony of that is we don't actually own the pump house, the council does. We are liable for its maintenance, upkeep and all that sort of stuff under our lease, but we don't have the money. The only source of money that we have to be able to do that heritage building up is through our levy. So the levy is not just for staffing, it is to deal with significant capital costs and other operational costs associated with an ageing infrastructure.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lee.
So I don't want to make a comment. I don't want to ask a question. I should say, Mr. Mayor, I want to foreshadow that I'd like to move an amendment or an addendum to the recommendations, if I could, at the right time.
You can, if you've got a second, you can do it now.
Nothing
Put it in writing
in the
and bring
city generates passion like MOTAT, and much of the passion is very, very positive and creative, with especially the passion of the volunteers. There have been complaints, and there are complaints and concerns about MOTAT made to us as elected representatives, and it's our job to take these complaints seriously. Just as the director of MOTAT has a job to run a technology museum, we have an obligation to ensure, especially under the MOTAT Act, that MOTAT is being run properly. And if people are complaining about it, people closely associated with the organisation, we can't be blamed for taking up those concerns. That's our job. And if we didn't take up those concerns, we wouldn't be doing our job. So what Mr. Frawley has, in defence, and there's no need for him to be so defensive, has pointed at, when it came to staff numbers, has pointed at the council staff numbers. Well, he may have a point. However, I think it's not really appropriate. However, if we are concerned about the whole group, well, having a look at the situation in MOTAT may be very instructive for everyone. And so what I would like to move is that the Chief Executive be authorised to review the performance of MOTAT with reference to the Museum of Transport and Technology Act, year 2000, and to look at its finances and governance situation. I'd like to move that if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Are we still in questions? That the staff are still at the table. Are we in debate now, or are we in? Where are we?
A motion on the floor.
He said it was going to, but they said
It doesn't have to be moved now. It doesn't have to be put now.
He's proposed.
It's not an amendment.
Yes, I'm getting a little bit of advice here as well. I want to make sure that the that there's some, I suppose, role clarity here and a respect for the relationship with MOTAT. If the sentiment here is that we need to dig into, or rather, not the right words, look at this, then I would choose to do that in a collaborative fashion with MOTAT. But this is really the point of the political working party as well, right, to have that engagement. So, yeah, I just want to, a lot of it, whether it's appropriate depends a little bit on how we approach the job of working with MOTAT to provide a full picture, financial and otherwise, to you.
Your Worship, could I help, please? Because I think Councillor Lee is correct. He wants to get a bit of a wider picture. And what he's actually asking for by way of resolution is in the terms of reference for the political working party. So I'm happy to move the recommendations, if you'd like to second. Yes. And I'm actually really relaxed on whether Councillor Lee's if he's really passionate and he wants his extra recommendation put in. But I would just wanted to give him the confidence that what he is requesting is indeed happening as part of the political working group. And indeed, in fact, if Mr Mullen would like to come forward, can confirm for us that what Councillor Lee's asking is actually in the terms of reference. No.
It's been moved and
So
it's been seconded and it's been accepted. There is an addition to this, so we'll have an H or a G rather adding on, doing the same thing, and I'm quite happy about that. No, we'll get the wording right in a minute, but calm down, everybody. I'll go to the next question, which is from John, whilst the wordsmiths are going.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor, and just the various interchanges there prompted me to have a little closer look at the indicative budget that we're considering today via the levy, and I just wonder if I could get a little bit more information. So when I come to the vexed question of staffing, I see that this 2023-24, the staffing cost is 10.03 million, and that constitutes roughly 51% of the total cost of activities. Is that correct? So staffing is over half the cost of activities.
No, it's 46% under the document in front of you.
Okay, well that's not what's in your own plan here. If I look at the subsequent years, that staffing cost then just keeps going up on average about 400 grand a year until 2027, 28, with overall increase then over that period is 1.6 million. So I guess what I'm really asking is, given a situation where the staffing cost is over 50% of the total cost of activities, and it keeps going up about 400 grand cumulatively, 1.6 million, in light of the visitor growth numbers I heard about, which relatively static, what is attributing to that continually climbing staff cost, which is already at a very high level as a proportion?
Pay rises, and in actual fact, it's not static visitation. Under that document, the visitation goes up. Whichever way you want to cut it, it's below 50%. So as staff costs go up, so does revenue and so does visitation numbers. And I can give you the figures I did give you the figures. I've got through the council staff last night. Our revenue to staff cost goes 2019 42%, 48%, 45%, 42%, currently 43%. It's anticipated to be 46% under the draft annual plan, not over 50%.
So I guess just from our perspective, we have a situation where that overall levy keeps going up, like as indeed other entities do, but in this instance it's with a high staffing component and relatively limited visitor growth. So I guess that's the point I'm making. You said it in one of your answers that the situation you inherited was a rather vexed one, but things have been relatively peaceful on that front since then. You've just concluded, I think, a draft annual plan consultation process. Jeez. Oh, is that okay? Oh, okay. Councillor
Hey,
Darby.
Phil, you're not helping.
Oh.
Please respect the speaker. Watson had some good points there, and everyone's meddling and talking. The questions were about
Jeez. So much for
steady increase.
my eloquent concentration on my wording.
Well, we'd be happy
No one
for
was
a
listening.
second go.
Was anyone listening?
Yeah, have another go, John.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, so I'll briefly sum that up.
My understanding of your question was that it's been going up 400,000 a year for staff, and there's not much growth in the visitor numbers. The gentleman responded that the percentage of that against income, but in fact it's not income, it's grants and visit income. And I get both of that, but I'm just saying that right at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of businesses out there that are cutting their costs, and it doesn't sound as though you guys are. You're just accepting things are going to go up and up and up, and I don't like hearing that.
We cut our costs for the last 3 years. The worship will remember last year we actually went below, we went backwards in our levy. And you went in and said you should all take a page out of Motat's book, quote unquote. So we've been static for 3 years, but given the infrastructure challenges that we have, we can't stay static. We run a very tight ship, but you know, there comes a point at which we have to deal with salary increases. We have to deal with infrastructural issues. We have to deal with things like the pump house. If we don't address them, they get worse and they cost even more to fix.
So, final question, Mr. Mayor, and I'll maybe reserve the right to speak to that, and it goes to the notion of, you know, relative transformation over the last decade or whatever it is. You've just finished your own consultation process, I think, on your draft annual plan. Did you receive any submissions from any organisations asking for a full public dialogue and review and direction and focus of MOTAT?
Just through you, Chair, we have just completed the draft annual plan consultation process. We did not receive any submissions along the lines that you have asked about the question regarding a full public dialogue. We did receive submissions from some organisations seeking money from MOTAT, and we received a brief submission, which we've had in the past, regarding you know, the way in which MOTAT is focusing. We've addressed those through a full public process. We've responded to those submissions. But in terms of the kind of questioning that has happened here today, nothing along those lines was presented at the draft annual plan process.
Through the chair, we did get a request from Mr. Rayner, who I understand has been in contact with several councillors about exactly the points that have been raised during questioning. Yes, he suggested that we had a full-blown discussion around MOTAT's future and all that sort of stuff, but going back to where we were before, that is one of the purposes of the political working group. And secondly, we are an independent statutory entity. The statute sets out the process which we are to follow. So I know that Mr. Rayner has been advocating and pushing quite hard on the edges, and I also know that he is probably the source of the volunteers are saying this, the volunteers are saying that. But Mr. Rayner has not been involved with the volunteers for a number of years, and he only turns up on site when he's there for a MOTAT Society committee meeting. But yes, he made that request.
So I'm just trying to clarify. One answer said no, you hadn't. The other answer said yes, you had.
Not specifically along the lines that have been asked here today.
Okay, so well, I just read verbatim from the submission that wasn't just from Mr. Rayner, it was from the Grey Power North Shore Association, submission to the MOTAT draft annual plan dated January 25th.
Through the chair, that Grey Power submission was signed by Mr. Rayner.
On behalf of Grey Power.
Yeah, and he also made one in his own name.
I just let you, I have no idea who Mr. Rayner is, and he hasn't contacted me.
Mr. Rayner was the, sits on the MOTAT Society Committee. He used to be the registrar at the MOTAT before I think it was before the legislation was passed. He is passionate about the transport heritage of Auckland. He has very strong views about the way MOTAT should be managed, run and orientated. He puts in a submission on behalf of Grey Power North Shore every year, and he usually puts in one in his own right as well, which the councillor has read out. Mr. Rayner is well known to us, and in fact he used to be on our board for a couple of years.
The councillor read out the Grey Power submission, not Mr. Rayner's.
It's signed by Mr. Rayner.
Okay, sounds they're not going to clear answer that, so we'll go to Councillor Furley.
Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation as well. I just want to start by saying that I've enjoyed coming to Motat since I was a little girl, and I remember well some of the sessions we had as a little girl growing up in Otara, where we would come and have sessions where we learned about how people used to make butter and how people used to write on slate. So those are some really awesome memories that I have. Just a question then on the benefit and the value of what you offer beyond the financial benefit, because I think perhaps people are very focused on the dollars, but it's the other benefit. As a young person growing up in Otara, having that experience at Motat, and even for my son generations later, decades later, coming to Motat and experiencing the tech world in a different way, are you able to quantify or are you able to speak to that benefit outside of the financial benefit?
Yes.
And then also my second question is, if we were to add $10 or $20 to the admission, what effect would that have on accessibility for communities like mine in Otara, Papatoetoe, Mangere, Otahu, South Auckland? Kia ora.
So dealing with the benefit question first is there's a very strong element of education through it, and that we start our education programs or experiences aimed at the under fives, and that goes all the way up to 11. Picking up the earlier question around science and technology, excuse me, we're doing that deliberately because the school system hasn't been focusing on science, the technology, engineering and maths aspects. So we see that as an important element to focus on. So using the heritage objects to tell that educational aspect with the view that, you know, children then embrace and go, well, mathematics isn't boring, engineering isn't boring. I've seen what it can do. I want to learn more about that. I want to stay at school and I want to go off to university and learn more. So we are deliberately focusing on that. To put our demographic into perspective, 89% of our visitors are families with children under the age of 11. The only other institution in Auckland that has that demographic is Auckland Zoo. Auckland Museum is similar demographic to us, but when it comes to that very strong family side, that's what we focus on. If we were to put our prices up, we would lose the South Auckland visitation. And we're very conscious of that. We would, if we wanted to increase our visitation numbers, we could just stop charging entry. Our visitation would go up, but we would have to increase the staffing numbers because we aren't set up to deal with when the 1 month where free entry to Motat was offered, we had 70,000 visitors through. We aren't geared to cope with that volume of visitation. So we're very conscious. We are looking at the pricing of our entry, but we are very conscious of what that slight increase can do to that particular demographic, which is very important to us.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Left to go. Councillor Alf Filipina, are you out there, Alf?
Yes, I am, Your Worship, and thank you. Tēnā koe te rangatire mai ko ngā mihi ki a koe mo tō aroha mahi koutou. Tēnā koe. Michael, look, I've just got two very quick questions. One of them is, I know that supporting the community is a very big part of the museum, and I understand that Motat commits to helping 10 community or charitable groups every month. How is that tracking, please?
Kia ora, ngā mihi, Alf, for your opening comments. Yes, we do. We provide a lot of community support. I suppose a very good example of that was Pacifica, which has just passed. We opened the museum up free. We had our colleagues from the Auckland Museum, Star Dome, Maritime Museum and the Art Gallery on site. We did that to support both Te Taki, Auckland Unlimited, but also the Pacifica community. And we designed the experience on site specifically to address that. but we provide food trucks to support, free of charge entry to the museum at night, again, so people can experience the exhibitions in a different context. But that one's aimed at our local community to come in and basically other communities, organisations, we're happy to help them wherever we can. So that's built into our objectives, that community support. But like I say, probably our best example of that is the recent Pacifica one.
Kia ora te Van. And the last part Michael, is in regards to, can you confirm for me that in the aviation hall you have te kōtiu, and that stories from the sky? Can you just sort of confirm that it's been shortlisted for the Museum and Heritage Best Use of Digital and International Award?
That's correct. Yeah, that's a digital experience which is projected onto the side of the airplanes, and it tells the story from Māori kites, kite, all the way through to the modern day, picking up the stories around Jean Batten, Richard Pearce, through the story on teal, etc. So yes, and it has been shortlisted for the award.
Okay. And look, just to let you know, I will be available in May if you want it. Kia ora.
Yeah. Kia ora.
Excellent offer, thank you. Councillor Bartley, and then we'll go to vote.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Michael, and your Chair for the presentation. I was going to try and ask a question to say what I want to say, but I'm just going to say it. I apologise for the tone of the questioning that you've had to endure today. I think there's a way that we can ask our questions but do it with respect, and I don't think that's been exercised in this meeting today, so I do apologise as someone sitting around this table. I want to acknowledge the work that you do with your outreach, because you're not just the museum that stays there. I'm being honest, I didn't really read all your reports, but what I know about what you do is from the community. I'm on the Board of Trustees for a school in South Auckland in Mangere, low decile school, Māori Pacifica, and they're going out to Motat. And that's how they're getting their connection to science and technology, which they wouldn't normally get that opportunity through the curriculum. So I am grateful to Motat for what you're doing, for the institution that you are for this city. I don't have any other questions to throw at you. I just want to say that we do appreciate your work and what you're doing for our city.
Thank you for that. That's the end of the questions, and we'll have a bit of a debate if you guys will retire. And our first person who is entering that is the Deputy Mayor, who was going to give us a bit of an address around the ARAFA thing, because we got a bit tangled up with Motat there, because ARAFA is tangled up amidst all the stuff. So off you go, Deputy Mayor Simpson.
No, I'm not actually. I'm actually going to ask Michael to come back to the front, if I may, please. So, Michael, this is the last meeting at Council for you as Chief Executive of Motat. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge your work in charge of that organisation. For those of you who don't know, Michael brought to Motat skills he had gained from many roles, but in particular almost 2 decades at a major London firm, law firm, Taylor Wessing, and at least 5 as its CEO and managing partner. When you arrived at Motat in 2013, the organisation had well-known issues as set out in Dame Cheryl Sutherland's report. In essence, that report said, get serious or shut down. So Michael set up reshaping Motat for Auckland and improving the professionalism of the organisation to meet modern museum standards. The Motat Act is very prescriptive, but within this, Michael, you were able to shift the focus and ensure that Motat engaged with a wide range of Auckland communities, including our young people, and towards a modern vision of the science that underpins the many wonderful transport and technology collections and objects that Motat holds. More recently, I think you deserve significant kudos for how you led MOTAT through the COVID years. As council, we asked for a significant restraint from you and your board, and you consistently responded to those requests. So thank you. And you did take a backward step around that time, and we are very grateful around that. At that time as well, you provided proactive and outward-looking leadership in the broader Auckland Museum sector around visitor and staff protocols through the many and sometimes confusing alert levels and traffic lights. You were generous in sharing those with other institutes, both in our city and indeed throughout the country. Michael, your tenure comes to an end at a very interesting time. It feels like MOTAT is approaching its next stage of evolution, both as a museum and also in its relationship with Auckland Council as its main funder. It is helpful then that you will not be lost quite yet, as I'm told you're staying on in an advisory capacity for some months. So, in summary, you took an organisation that was widely seen as it being at war with itself and failing, to one that is far more stable and ready now to look into the future. So thank you for that contribution, and I know that we all join with you in thanking you for what you have done for Auckland. Thank you.
Councillor Filippini, we have another crack at the whip.
No, look, I won't have another crack because that was questions. And if it's going to go to the vote, I'll just leave it at that. Kia ora.
Okay, well, I think we have finished questions at long last. I didn't realise there was a speech coming up. You got a question, Councillor Hills?
No, I was just wanting to briefly speak on it.
Well, we've got in front of you something that's moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Lee, and it has on it a G, which wasn't there this morning. And so now it's open for debate. So, Councillor Hills, if you want to say something now, it's fine.
Kia ora, thank you. And look, of course, we're supposed to question things that come to us. And some of us, well, I'll speak for myself only, just didn't like the way some questions were asked. And the surprise nature, this has happened twice today. If people were given a chance to find details from 2000 before a meeting, I'm sure that all would have been laid out on the table quite easily. When Michael, and thank you for your service to our city, Michael, when he took over, the whole point was it was in a dire state. I think, as someone said, I think it was Deputy Mayor, that actually it was completely dysfunctional. There was reports of childish behaviour, appropriation of funds, all sorts of different things. And Michael took over to try and turn that around. When Michael took over, there were 70 staff. So I'm not sure what happened between 2010 and the time that Michael took over, but there were 70 staff. So within a 10-year time frame, it's not a huge increase. But in that time, things have changed as well. If you look back to when the legislation happened, they had under 90,000 visitors a year. So you are going to see an increase in the numbers of staff. As someone mentioned, the Mayor actually did congratulate, and I remember that they took an $80,000 cut last year. They were the only ones in this decision last year to take a reduction because they said didn't need it. In 2010, when the Super City happened, they had to rebuild a $15 million building for the aviation hall, which was put to be paid over levies over time. So it's very easy to point to the beginning and an end and go, how come inflation, you're not travelling? Well, staff costs, we know our inflation has gone up miles, but they're having to pay for buildings, new and old, through a levy. And as Michael mentioned, some of those buildings, that the $1 million going to one of their buildings this time is our building. If they gave up tomorrow, we'd be having to do that with the money instead of giving it to them to do it. So I just want to make sure that, of course, we need to do this. I'm happy with G because that's what actually happens anyway, but it's important also to recognise currently, whether we like the legislation or not, they are independent from us. They give over more details than we we get from most organisations already. But I think it's important to note all the different things they do rather than just thinking they're doing the same as what they were doing 24 years ago. The other thing, Mayor, of course things cost money when they're public. What do our libraries cost us? We don't charge people to go through there. I know some people may want us to charge for libraries or sports fields or art or whatever it is, but it's actually a very slim, if you look at the pie graphs for the annual budget, what we spend on arts, culture and heritage in this city is tiny compared to what cities in Australia, around the world actually spend, and compared to what we spend on water, roads and everything else, it is extremely small. So I think the conversation, if we don't like this, then the conversation, someone needs to put up a notice of motion and say, we want MOTAT to close down. I wouldn't support that, but it does require public funding to address and look after public assets. Of course, we should always be looking for efficiencies, but it did feel like the attack or the assumption was that this shouldn't be happening, or we shouldn't be having kids through the door, or we should just charge $80 per person on there. So just wanted to put that out there. But everything else is fine.
Councillor Lee.
I'm very happy with the amendment, the way it has been incorporated, but I believe there are three salient aspects that should be included, and one is the Museum of Transport and Technology Act 2000, which underlines the importance and, if you will, the permanence of MOTAT. The second aspect of it, and quite unique, is the Museum of Transport and Technology Society, which was also established by the Act. And finally, as part of that, are the volunteers. It's a very unique organisation. It's much beloved, and I think everyone in this room would support it. However, we do need to have a look at it, 24 years on after the establishment of the Act. And so I would request that the Act, the Society and the volunteers also be included in that review. Thank you.
I think the governance covers that, and it will look into those three things, and that was a very good amendment. Thank you very much. And so I've now got Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And it's not just 24 years since the Act, it's actually 60 years since MOTAT was established back in 1964. And as a number of people have said, MOTAT is very dear to people from all over Auckland. It's been part of our lives. I can remember our own family, the very moving experience it always was going over to MOTAT and seeing the Lancaster bomber, which had a real meaning to people in our family. And I can remember the last time we went with my grandkids, there was still a blacksmith there. I don't know if he's still there or not. And seeing my dad jump in behind and start whacking out a horseshoe, because he'd been a blacksmith himself, and that my little grandkids were there to see him in full flight. And the blacksmith at MOTAT was kind enough to let him take over for his own little solo performance. So MOTAT is an intrinsic part of Auckland, so no one is in any way suggesting it be closed down or prices put up. That's the last thing I want, and I'm sure anyone sitting in this room wants. But what the public wants, and has a right to expect, is that if councillors feel that it's necessary to ask questions on the basis of information they've received from constituents, they should be able to do that. And often the tone of questioning is informed by the tone of answers too, on some occasions, I might say. So from my perspective, all I was looking to clarify is what I thought was a rather disproportionately high percentage of staff cost that might well be fully justified or required. I'm not really in a position to say either way, but I am in a position to ask of a staffing ratio as to the cost of activities that is over 50%, and a circumstance where over a 4 or 5 year period, those staff costs then go up $1.6 million, while the visitor growth level grows a little bit, but doesn't grow too much. It is relatively static, if I could generalise to that extent. I guess in terms of that 60-year hallmark for this wonderful institution of ours, it probably is appropriate to look at how MOTAT has evolved. We all know things change, but as Councillor Lee pointed out, there is a very unique act that governs MOTAT and really emphasises that importance of the history of transport and technology, the conservation of the heritage of the museum, historical and scientific scholarship and research and so on. So that's entrenched in that legislation, and I would suggest it's entrenched in the psyche of Aucklanders who over decades have got such enjoyment out of those features at the museum. So I welcome the G. I think that certainly enables me to support matters as they are, and I look forward, I hope, to the involvement of some of these other people and associations who have a real passion for MOTAT and have backed that passion up with volunteering, with putting work in over many years. So they're not just been sitting on the sideline making, casual comments. These are people who have turned up and volunteered their services either as work or in a governance role. So those people deserve to have a say too, and I think that's implicit in the Act. So thank you, Mr Mayor, for the way you've allowed this item to be conducted. I think it's resulted in some good debate, and hopefully the outcome is a good one for MOTAT and for the people of Auckland who so treasure it. Thank you.
With that, Councillor Darb.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge MOTAT and the representatives here today, and thank you for your presence here and the way you conducted yourself and the information that you conveyed. And Michael, I do want to thank you for your really proud history, taking care of a very frail organisation when you took it over. And it's a very successful organisation now. I'm going to make an apology to Michael because I'm a part of a collective here. I'm part of this governing body. And today, the standard of governance here on this item dropped to a new low. That is my opinion. It is one thing to interrogate the information, the numbers. It is another thing to interrogate an individual. We have lost individuals from our organisation. Some tragically, others have just left to go to jobs because they do not feel cared for. I say this very seriously. We are governors and leaders of an organisation of some 10,000 plus people. We have a responsibility to care for our people and all the people that visit this place. They were not cared for today. Our 10,000 people will be watching this streaming. They will now, and they will look and they will go, where are our leaders? Mayor, I know it's distracting sometimes because things are coming in on your phone, but at a point in this meeting, a critical point, you were distracted, and it was important to have the chair take control. I'm not going to labour the criticism, Mayor.
Hello, Nicole speaking.
Hey, Nicole, this is Alf again.
Alf, your mic's on.
Hi.
Hi. So, look, I acknowledge Michael as well.
Alf, your mic is on.
Oops.
I am embarrassed at the level of governance here today. It has not been a governing body on this item. It has been an interrogation body.
All right, that's your opinion.
I am the one that is speaking. I've taken the floor, and you are welcome to take the floor after me if you like, Mayor. Others have interjected on me. It is uncomfortable what I am saying, but it is the truth. Thank you.
Thank you for that opinion. Councillor Walker.
Without speaking at length, I'm at odds with what I heard just now. I think that one of the most important things in this chamber is debate, and arguably vigorous debate, especially when we're talking about very significant sums of money. And in this instance, the sums of money are very significant. And in my view, and I'm sure the view of many of us, there are improvements that can be made. You only have to visit MOTAT, as I've done, to experience that. It's a wonderful institution, but it has a lot of potential. Much of that potential relies on the volunteers that have largely built it up and maintained those collections. And in my view, one of the things that this city needs to do much better, both across MOTAT but also other institutions, is to really cultivate volunteerism in our city. We do not do it to anywhere near the extent I've seen in some other cities fairly recently. So I support the healthy debate. I have very real concerns around the expenditure on MOTAT, and that's in the context where there's another institution, the Auckland Museum, which receives a substantial sum of money, and I have some concerns around that. But I think we get real value for money there, and significant visitation around what is another cultural icon. So I think as a collective, we need to actually foster healthy debate. And that appears to be diminishing around this table because some people don't like it. I certainly think that there is the expectation from Aucklanders that we have healthy debate, that we ask the appropriate questions and we get answers. We should all be able to do that without being accused of interrogation or something of that order. Yet we get that every time now that one of us asks a question. We ask it in an appropriate manner, but the retort comes back, oh no, you can't do that. I'm afraid that's not right. That's our job. And I commend the Mayor for allowing that debate and those questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Newman.
I had, very briefly, Your Worship, I can't draw the line between an inquiry about additional revenue and closing down MOTAT. If somebody has a line to draw upon that, I'd like to know, because that's not what I heard today. I hear, you know what that's called? It's called flying a kite. And I just want to acknowledge you, Michael, because I think that you have led the organisation through a difficult period, and you've answered some questions, possibly not to the extent that some people would like, but you gave a narrative better than anybody else who was trying to argue your case today. Not sure that I agree with some of the assumptions around the business case, but I think that the Chair, Helen, understands that, and she's nodding in the background there, Your Worship, and that's good, because a frank and candid exchange is necessary when you're talking about public money, a substantial amount of public money. What I do look forward to, Your Worship, is for more information on this matter, because I have every expectation that just as the government works through its current legislative program, at some point the MOTAT Act, which is nearly a quarter of a century old, will come back for consideration, and I would expect that this council would be part of that. And finally, I just want to say that I happen to love MOTAT, and MOTAT's best days really exist because of the love of the people who do give their time. It is an organisation that marches in part because of its volunteers who love it, and I think that that's fabulous. There's transport and technology, and there's a lot to love about the transport modes that have built Auckland, even if some people struggle with that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. We're now just about to put the vote, but I will point out that whilst some people here are for the staff, I'm here for the 1.8 million Aucklanders and the thousands and thousands who pay rates. And $18 million or $19 million is about $20 a rate unit. And I only got into this because when I do division and the question that Councillor Williamson raised, I don't know any of the people, the elderly gentleman from North Shores apparently is a protagonist. But when I divided one into the other and find $86 a head versus $8 in, it requires some debate and consideration. There's no question about that. I mean, and people who are defending it shouldn't feel bad about defending it either. They should be able to defend it. They should know that that is a very large sum of subsidy for each thing. And we have a lot of things for subsidy. It's probably more than we have for opera of all things. Something I have no contact with in my life at all. But thank you for everybody not getting too hostile or upset about it. I'm now going to put the vote. All those in favour of that, please say aye. To the contrary, carried. There you are.
Oh, I'd like to record my vote against G, but I'll support it.
What
if
would
you're
you
taking
like
it in
to
parts.
do? Record your...
Vote against G. I don't support G, but I support the rest of it.
Righto, well, okay, you don't have to, everybody else does.
Record against you, please. Record
Okay,
against you.
two who don't want to look into why $85 is a good price.
I think it'll be
recorded.
done anyway. You don't need a separate one.
The rest of us will make sure that it's good value for the next lot, which is, no, the Auckland War Memorial